Welcome back. So if you don't know by now, it's all eyes on Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana today. He's set to deliver his medium-term budget policy statement this afternoon. Economists say the economy is likely in a technical recession, so clearly Godongwana faces tough decisions. We have our team in Parliament ahead of the speech. Business anchor Devan Murugan joins us now live for an update. So Devan, obviously the Finance Minister is faced with the task of reframing what he said back in February of this year with the current budget because of such a chaotic 2022. And you've spoken to a lot of people in business and politicians, etc. What are they hoping to hear from him?
Yeah, we'll get to that in a moment, but you're quite right. That's exactly what the midterm budget is all about. You have that huge allocation budget in February, and as we get halfway through down the line in October, there's almost a recheck. A check is if whether or not those priorities have shifted in any way, whether or not there are needs that are emerging that changes the way government sets out its finances. That's what the midterm budget is all about. And I need not tell you, as hot as it is here, the issues are hot as well, that Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana will face when he delivers that budget in less than an hour from now. You've got departments that are responsible for building schools, roads, hospitals. All of these are competing for a chunk of funds that the Finance Minister may or may not reprioritize, for example. And I mean, the issues we've been hearing for the last few days, Eskom, social grants, the wage bill, all of that, and the answers as to how that will unfold in this budget will surface. But I want to dig deeper into them. Martin Ackerman is the chief economist at Citadel. Martin, thanks very much indeed for your time. Look, it's a plate full. But I think let's just crunch down into one of the biggest things, because so much about this economy and indeed people's livelihoods are dependent on whether or not we have electricity flowing through the pipeline in this country. So it's the veins of the economy. So that's where we start. Whether or not, the big question, Eskom will have some of its debt being taken on to government's balance sheets. Economists, analysts like yourself are watching out for that. What's your take on that one?
Yeah, Devan, I think, the one thing that we need to realize is that, even taking over some of the debt might not sort out the electricity problem. For government to take over the debt will create some space for Eskom to do better financial decisions and planning going forward. But that doesn't mean tomorrow there's no load shedding. So we also need to think about reinvesting back into the whole energy supply, which might not all be coal, might not all be Eskom. But that will definitely be relief for the entity as it stands today. I think, the focus at the moment is obviously the overrun in revenue. The discussion right now is, well, there's some money on the table, so who's getting what? And we can talk a little bit later in terms of why did we get this overrun. But now the focus is to say, what will government do, or Treasury, with this additional money that's on the table? Eskom is obviously one of those that's in quite need for that. In the February budget, they made it quite clear that any SOE can't get any funding anymore unless, they need to stand on their own feet and value add to the economy. But they left the door open just for Eskom to say that's probably the only one, because like you've said, we need, the whole economy needs electricity to run a business, to run hotels, to make incomes neat and so forth. So this is part of that. There's been a lot of talk about it, whether the number is going to be 200 or something different, that we'll hear later today. And I think then the detail in terms of how they're going to do that, because now suddenly government needs to take responsibility for that, and we already got very high debt to GDP levels. That will probably hear more in going into the February budget. But I think that is the focus in terms of, will some of this overrun be used for Eskom?
Just one more question on Eskom before we move forward. So the sense is that they will take on 200 billion rand of the 400 billion rand debt. One wonders what sort of discussions unfold, especially from a finance minister who is going to actually be putting pen to paper on this one. Does he give Eskom conditions? I mean, does he say, well, we'll take on 200 billion rand of your debt, but make sure you guys show me something on the operational side? Some return has to happen, Martin.
No, definitely. I think with that will come a lot of hurdles, deliverables, in terms of saying, well, what do we get in change for taking over this debt? That's why I said when I started, it's not just about sorting out the pressure in terms of the financial pressure, but by doing something like this, we need to ensure that there is going to be a resolve for the load shedding, because that directly feeds into stronger growth, which help the government in terms of higher tax collection. So you can't just help on the one side, but get nothing on the other hand. stand. So I think government will be quite clear to say part of doing this for us is to say that we can, going forward, rely more on strong economic growth. That gives us more tax revenue, and that takes us away from that debt cliff where we need to actually go and borrow more money. So they can't do it without those kind of requirements as part of the package to take over the debt.
And I believe as we watch some of the ministers arriving, I think one of our other cameras are picking that up. The other big cloud over this is the wage bill, right? So a third of government's expenditure is the wage bill. I think there's a sense now that government may put pen to paper on 3%. They've already indicated, the Labour Minister says he's given the go-ahead, quote-unquote, for the Finance Minister to implement a 3% wage increase. Unions are having none of it. I wonder to what extent, this will play out in the budget, because really speaking, it's about credibility, Martin. He's got to show the ratings agencies, he's got to show those looking at him that we are a government of fiscal prudence. So I'm wondering if you think there'll be any surprises on the wage bill, or do you think that 3% increase for public sector's workers would stand?
Yeah, I think they made it quite clear as well in February, not only in February, the past couple of budgets that we've been seeing, given the fact that the wage bill is one of the biggest components, and in fact, if you compare us to our peer group, it is the biggest component in our budget, way more than our peer group countries. Like you've mentioned, it's about a third of the budget. If you exclude the interest payment, so basically what is left after paying interest on the debt, that's about 40% of the budget. That's a huge amount. How do we get that smaller? Because that's part of what the rating agencies are looking for, because, if you increase that with inflation, it's baked into the cake forever. So how do you get that smaller? Obviously, you need to reduce the public sector, which is not easy. So maybe we'll do that by not replacing vacant jobs. And the other thing is having a stick in the ground and saying we can't afford more. That is it. So I think what they communicated in February and again now, it seems like they're quite committed to say that's it. We can't do anything more than that. So let's hope they stick to that, because we're in a situation, despite the overrun, that if we continue with this longer term, like I've said, this expense will be with us, linked to inflation for the rest of our lives. And if you don't get economic growth, there's no way that we're going to match that.
Well, Martin Ackerman, I believe that you would be hanging around. Just before we get into that budget speech, we'll just have another chat with Martin Ackerman. He's the chief economist at Citadel. Lots of other stuff we want to dig into. We've got the extension or potential extension of this social distress grant. That's going to cost money, billions of rands. So we'll find out what could happen there. And then, of course, we've got these peripheral issues like the e-tolls and the issue around settling what happens with fuel in this country and how we determine those prices. That's all coming up. So lots to look forward to. Remember, the minister starts speaking at exactly 2 o'clock this afternoon, live here on eNCA.
Absolutely, Devan, and that's in what? 33 minutes time. And as you heard from our business anchor and editor, Devan Murugan, will be taking you to that midterm budget speech by Enoch Godongwana live here on eNCA. So